Hello and salams everyone. This is ZainabRights, bringing you the fourth session on the same series on toxic masculinity. Today I have the immense pleasure of having my good friend and the mental health professional, Berak Hussain, joining us to give us the mental health perspective on recognizing toxic behavior and how to react to it, and setting boundaries that are healthy, and also going forward to heal oneself. So here she is. If you have questions, please post them and I will try to see them and ask her.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam, how are you? I can hear you, but
Alhamdulillah.
I can't see you.
You can't see me? I can hear
Mhm.
and see you.
Hmm. It's still loading. So let's see.
We always have fun with the technical issues, huh?
Yeah. Are you on Wi-Fi?
Get off.
Can't hear you at all.
How
Oh,
about
there
how
you
about
are.
now? Okay, I took it
Yes.
off Wi-Fi. Assalamu alaikum, my dear sister. How are you, Zainab?
Alhamdulillah, how are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Bless you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's been a while. Just see
It's
each other
been
online.
it's been a crazy day, so thank you for bearing with me and just in the midst of exams week. But I really,
Bless you.
as you know, this topic is important, and that's why I'm doing it now. And I think that, I didn't realize how prevalent this issue is until you start talking about it and you start doing work around it. You're like, oh my gosh. And then people will reach out to you and tell you of their stories. And then it just gets more real. It doesn't just go away.
No.
And I think that the more, I've heard people, and I've heard both men and women, to be fair, who brought up their concerns, both sides. So there's toxicity in both sides. And I think you're the best person to speak to us about this because you have the mental health background, you've experienced this in your own life and in your professional life, seeing all the people that you do. So, without further ado, I think everyone knows who you are. You're pretty famous.
Who's
um,
talking?
and I guess I want to start off with, the psychological aspect of toxicity, right? How does one recognize toxicity in a person? What are the character traits like?
So there's a variety of characteristics to look for, but it's also how it makes you feel, right? So
Hmm.
I was preparing for this and I was reading up on some different articles that you sent me as well that we found interesting on the topic. And I
Hmm.
combined it along with what I've seen in my work and what I've seen around me when people share their stories with me. So, to begin, we need to talk about the mental health aspect in terms of how it impacts people. So,
Hmm.
toxic people can elicit stress in other people. They cause that stress, right? And in that behavior. So, they do things that they don't apologize for, or sometimes they do apologize, but then they will repeat this behavior, right? So this
Hmm.
ongoing behavior, continuous toxic behavior, and we'll get into it, that causes physical health problems for people who are in the presence of these toxic people. So for example, body aches, stomach problems, anxiety, eating and sleeping challenges, and the other illnesses, these are considered byproducts of the stress that can be caused by toxic people. So, characters or characteristics to look out for. All right. Toxic people can be manipulative, right? That's what they do to get people to do what they want. It's all about them. They use other people to accomplish whatever their goal is, right? They don't care about what you want. It's not about equality in the relationship. It's quite the opposite. It's all about them. I'm sure our friends who are joining us and those who will watch us later will think and reflect about the toxic people in their lives and recognize the manipulation, perhaps.
Yeah.
Another one is being judgmental. So you want to keep your eyes and ears open about criticism towards you, what you've done, what you didn't do, what you could have, should have, all of these things. It's never about them, and they will lie if it serves them,
Hmm.
right? So they will flip it back on you as well and say, you should have, could have, would have. But in the end, it's like, well, that's not quite fair. You know, why are you putting such criticism upon me when I haven't really actually done any of these things? Which takes us to the idea of that they take no responsibility for their own feelings. Rather, they project their feelings onto you. They make you feel bad about yourself. I think this is something that we recognize whenever we've been around people that are toxic. We start feeling bad about ourselves because of their behavior. Number four, if you try, or rather, to continue with this point, if you try to point this out to them, they will defend themselves to the death. They are right, you are wrong, and take no responsibility whatsoever for anything that they do. Number five, they do not apologize, and they believe that they are entitled. So they don't see any reason to apologize because it's always somebody else's fault, right? So even though they try to create relationships or friendships, it's always to serve their own ends, right? They try to gain sympathy and attention by showing themselves to be the victim, right? I've heard some toxic people say things such as, friendships are investments. I invest in them. And it didn't occur to me after when I saw the impact of their toxicity around me and other people, that's what they meant by that. It was an investment for them. They took from that other person till it served them well and around them, but they didn't quite care about the other person. They are, number six, inconsistent. Number five, they're inconsistent. It's hard to know who you're with at any given time because they're not that same person. There's no consistency to their character, their personality, right? They may change their attitude, their opinion, their behavior, their perspective, depending on what they feel they need to accomplish in that moment or what they want to happen. Also, they know when to be kind to you to get what they want. Again, that's part of that manipulation. Number six, they make you prove yourself to them. Okay? These toxic people make you choose them over other people or something that they want over something you want. So often this becomes kind of like this tactic that we hear about, divide and conquer, right? So only choice is them, even though they will cut you off in other meaningful relationships to satisfy them. Number seven, they make you defend yourself. You're always on guard, right? They have difficulty staying on point about certain issues. They'll do the runaround, probably because they're not interested in what you have to say or your point of view, or trying to reach not a satisfying, but a amicable solution for both of you, right? So remember, they are the ultimate manipulators. So their tactics and strategies can be very vague. It can be unclear. They can be very confusing, and they can be diverting the focus on what you were discussing to how you were discussing it. You said it this way, and then you're completely left with, but hold on, what about this discussion? No, they will focus on your tone, your words, your body language. They focus on problems, not solutions. Yep. And finally, number eight, yeah. So
I know that one too well. Yeah. And I think that's so prevalent. A lot of people like to complain and criticize rather than take that action. Right.
Finally, yeah. And this is something we can all relate with in terms of toxicity, in terms of they're not caring, they're not supportive, or they're not interested in what's important to you. In fact, the good things that happen to you, right? It moves them away from attention from them and from focusing on their own goals. So we want to be really aware of the people who find fault with you or make you wrong. They have no loyalty. The only loyalty they have is to themselves. I just want to quickly run through. So these are some characteristics, but I also want to show the flip side in terms of how people could feel the toxicity impact on them. We've already mentioned at the beginning, the stress, right? So we said it causes stress, anger, confusion, exhaustion, and it causes self-doubt in others, right? It can make you feel like you are going crazy, that you are the victim of a psychopath, and they're trying to manipulate or control you. Their behaviors, again, they can severely affect your life, meaning mentally, physically, emotionally, all of the above. They're unlikely to understand how other people feel or even care. Like we said, they're self-centered and emotionally dependent. That's an interesting one, which shows you that there's a lot to do with their upbringing and how they connected with people. If they had healthy attachment bonding with their family or other people around them. We mentioned again, very negative and critical, financially irresponsible. Probably seen some people like that as well. We talked about manipulation, entitlement, disrespect. That's a big one. They could be emotionally abusive bullies, right? And this leads us to abuse, and as well as the narcissistic type, which I've done lots of programs on, including abuse. And these are characteristics that you find with the abusive person. They're very good at sensing your weakness, or your Achilles heel, and they will use that against you. You see a lot of passive aggressive behavior. So passive aggression is basically non-verbal aggression that manifests in negative behavior. And instead of openly expressing how they feel, they'll come back underneath with subtle, pokes and gestures and all these things directed at you. So instead of saying what they're actually, what's upsetting them, they'll find small things to poke around. And we've seen that a lot with people, right? And this toxic behavior may worsen with age if they don't acknowledge, if they don't take care of it, and if they're not willing to make the changes and acknowledge it. And that's really rare.
And I think, something that's interesting, and maybe you can shed a light on this, is the ability to change oneself, right? We've heard from other guests on my platform where, we've established that no one can really change you except yourself. And I think that that's where a lot of us are fooling ourselves, right? When it comes to toxic people, we think they're going to change. We hope they're going to change. We do everything we can to get them to change.
Right.
Can you shed light on this? Can they change, and how do they change? How does one change their toxicity?
First of all, if they can acknowledge it. When you're dealing with abusers, when you're dealing with narcissistic type behaviors rather, unless they admit and they're aware of it and they come to seek help, that's not going to change. You can bring, if you have somewhat of a healthy relationship, but you notice these traits and you bring it to them and say, hey, I think, this could be happening, and focus on the traits. Perhaps that person is willing to work on those things. There are people who have, let's say, tempers, and they want to work on them. That's something I have, and I always try to work on it because I'm constantly aware, and I try to learn from Imam Musa al-Kadhim, who is the one on, the one who holds the anger, right? So if you're aware of it and you're constantly working on it and bettering it, sure, it's possible to go on that journey.
Berak, is it safe to say that, none of us are perfect, and I love how you said that, like, I have a temper and I'm working on it, and I know many things I have that I need to work on and I'm working on. So is it safe to say that we all kind of have, like, where is the line where
when this is hurting other people? Yeah, when this is hurting other people to the point where you are consistently doing this inconsistent behavior, then that's the problem, right? If we notice the toxic person, for example, is causing a lot of these things in other people, right? And that person is continuously behaving like that and they are blaming other people, then that's opposite of what you said. Because we are aware of the faults that we have and we are working on them, and we're trying to better ourselves at these weaknesses or things that we can work upon. The abuser, the toxic person, the narcissist is not going to admit that, right? But there are people, and I've seen cases where the partner, in this case, it was a husband who had actually raised his hand on his wife, but then he recognized the error of his ways and he asked Allah for forgiveness. He asked his wife for forgiveness, and he worked on bettering himself, and he did change. But this person became aware and wanted to change. We're talking about people here who are blaming other people and who are not aware and self-conscious and are not willing to work on themselves to change the situation, but rather projecting, gaslighting, and blaming the other people.
Can you, I've heard this word, gaslighting. Can you explain what that is? There's a whole movie about it, by the way, if for those who don't know.
So
go ahead.
Essentially, it's a type of projection that you are projecting what you feel and what you are doing on that other person and saying they are doing it, right? And in the act of the gaslighting, you are causing the person who is experiencing that to go crazy. So that's why I say it's a crazy maker. And that's one of the first things we describe. So they could be projecting onto that person, you said this, or you didn't say this. when in fact that person, let's say, had said it and they said, no, you didn't say that. They will make that person believe that they'd actually didn't say it. I have personally experienced that before. I remember that I had said something and the abuser, the toxic person, was actually saying, no, 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 you said this, you said this. And he made everybody around say, didn't she say that? She said that, she said that. I actually started believing, oh, maybe I did say that. And it created self-doubt.
Wow.
I studied this stuff and I was treating people, and yet I was still being manipulated by this person in my life at that time. So it's not because you're not smart that you are not aware of this. It's because you are good natured. You are good, loving and giving and caring to this person around you. And because they're a master manipulator and because they are having goals that they want to get to, they will use you and play with your mind to get what they want. So that's
So
pretty common.
I think we've established that today's session is about being smart, because I want to go back to that. This is not like a joke, oh, we need to be smart. It's more that I feel like people who are not smart will get taken advantage of. I mean, this world,
even people who are smart,
you're gonna get eaten alive. And I've been through many things in my life where I started out very naive and got a lot of consequences for that. And people will be out there. The world is not as nice as we want. We hope that it is. And I think it is important. And I want today for you to explain, how does one become smart without losing their good nature? I think that's
I just want to change the word, Zainab, not necessarily smart, but aware, because even the most intelligent of people, men and women, have been taken advantage of by these types of personalities. So it's not a lack of intelligence, but rather awareness. You mentioned it, like, you're a smart woman, mashallah, and you mentioned that because you were naive at some point in your life, you were taken advantage of by such personalities. It doesn't mean that you were not intelligent. You were just not aware that people could be vicious and toxic like that until you actually went through these experiences, right? So your question was, how can we be aware of these things? Be aware of how you feel. That's a huge indicator. How you feel when you are around these people. There's something about energies, about people. Like, you have beautiful, good energy. I always love the vibe you give off, whether it's through your posts or whenever we've hung out in person. And inshallah, when this pandemic is over, we can do more of that. There's a beautiful energy about you. We enjoy each other's company. We had a lot of fun when you came, I think 2 years ago, you came here, right? We enjoyed each other's company. We didn't feel there was competition between us. There's no toxicity. We both support and lift each other in what we do individually in our work. And even if we were in the same field, I think we would have been the type of people to refer other people to come to each of us. And that's what I do with my fellow therapists, because we have that kind of vibe and energy. Now, the opposite of that, where you feel at comfort, at ease, where you trust somebody, the opposite of that, when you're in the presence of somebody who has that toxicity, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel something is off. And I always tell people, trust your instinct, trust your gut, listen and look at those red flags if they pop up. There's a reason that we were wired instinctively by God subhanahu wa ta'ala to be able to recognize danger. And this also includes being around toxic people. So this list that we described in terms of how they make you feel, if you start feeling self-doubt, even physically. I recently had an experience which exactly describes this, and I couldn't understand what was going on with me. And I was speaking with a friend of mine who's an older sister. I look up to her as a mentor, and I was describing to her how I felt after an incident with another person that I just felt off about. I did not feel comfortable with their behavior, how they had certain, not restrictions, but certain instructions towards me about something, and it just felt off. It just did not feel right. I did set my boundaries in terms of how I wanted things done, but it still felt wrong. There was something off about it. After I finished what I had to do, I felt sick. I remember we mentioned the physical symptoms. I actually felt sick in my stomach. I felt very dizzy and lethargic, no energy. Now, I'm a high energy person. And when I do these types of events and other work, I usually get a high off of doing these events. I'm just very, the endorphins are released into the system where you feel good about what you've done. I didn't feel like that after doing what I had to do. And when I spoke with my friend who was in the UK, hours difference between us. Bless her, she stayed up talking to me. And she said, honey, don't you recognize what you were dealing with? You were dealing with toxic people. Like, how did I miss that? I teach people this and I missed it. And the point here being is that even if you're aware, sometimes you could miss it because you don't think that that person is actually toxic. And I had to go back and I'm like, subhanallah, my body was screaming at me.
And I
To
do
pay
want to
attention.
make that distinction. I think that's a very, a core of Islamic principle, right? That if a person is inhibiting toxic behavior, just like you said, they have the ability to change if they're aware of it. So that doesn't necessarily make them like evil or
No,
bad, whatever, right? It's
but if they
just in that
choose,
moment. So
if they choose.
and that's the big thing that I've been trying to bring up with the series. People felt very attacked that I was generalizing, and that's not true. I think that when we speak about toxic behavior or toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, we're talking
Femininity.
people who are exhibiting or manifesting these toxic behaviors that can really be soul sucking for a lot of us. Like I feel sometimes I feel like, like dementors, like they'll suck your soul out of your body and you'll, like you said, end up feeling horrible and you don't even know why. You'll recoil. Like I know, for example, like I've become very aware, of toxic people and I'll recoil in a room or I won't talk as much or I'll just feel sick physically.
Yes.
There have been people who made me physically sick. I've been like bedridden for like weeks.
Oh, bless
Um,
you.
and so, and like you said, it's energy. You, as a person who, for example, is aware of their energy, they're gonna pick up on positive and negative energy, and you're just gonna know when you vibe with people. So if you're
Absolutely.
exhibiting good nature, good vibes, people, good vibes is something everyone throws around these days, but it's actually true. Like you can sense someone who has a good vibe. And I want to, like, what I'm really interested in to know is that, you work with a lot of people, right? You have so many cases that you see in and out. Have you ever come across stories that, like, you want to share? Like, things that, like, an example of how somebody was, and this is about toxic masculinity, so you can talk along those lines. But is there an
Sure.
example that we can
Most
learn?
most cases, obviously, when we talk about toxic masculinity, could be in different areas. It could be with friends, could be with family, could be coworkers, it could be partners, of course, could be projects, volunteer, community activities, could be, your sports team that you play with. So there's too many stories to choose from. But essentially, the main theme that I see over and over again, when we're talking specifically about male toxicity or toxic masculinity, it has to do with partners, where you hear the woman talking about how the partner has mistreated her or how he puts her down or how he makes her feel, how he gaslights, how he projects, how he manipulates, how he controls, how he demands, how he makes it everything about him. And these are, again, these lead to abusive relationships, as we know. I also see this with, let's say, students, female students, graduate students who have male supervisors. So there's a lot of mansplaining, perhaps, right? We see that. We see a lot of people or in these positions where there's no respect because they are female. They don't think they're good enough to do these graduate studies. There's a disrespect there. They don't give them the same opportunities as other people in the lab. Let's say I've seen that time and time again. And so the people that come for the counseling, we work on trying to recognize that it's not about them. It has everything to do with that person who was putting that male in this situation, a male supervisor, prof, who's putting this type of pressure on his female graduate student. I've also had situations where there's sexual harassment, right? So that it has gone as far as that as well. So I've also seen in the community, and this is so unfortunate, and I know a lot of communities, not just ours, struggle with this, where female speakers, female lecturers, whether they're Islamic or different positions like you and I, we've experienced this where they have not been respectful. And the irony is, and I've experienced this many times now, and I laugh about it now, I didn't at the time, and I could laugh about it even in a recent situation, is that they're putting on events for women to promote, like, that's the irony. They're putting on events for women empowerment, to show the women in our community, to show respect. Meanwhile, behind the scene, you should see what's going on. It's a circus. The lack of respect, unfortunately, is not there. And it's just for show. So this is, again, part of that nature that you can see, right? Part of the personalities and the characters of toxic person. They will show something to one person or a community or the public, but then it's something else on the other side, which then goes into, like we said earlier, whether they're abusive people or narcissistic type of people, or, you know, let's just say it straight up, hypocrites, munafiqeen. They show one thing, but truly this is on the other. And what's interesting is that then they project it. Then they project it and gaslight it onto the other women or the other people, or anybody who dares to try and say, hey, you know, maybe we should do it this way, or, oh, no, maybe let's try this, or no. They're like, no, it's got to be this way, that way. That's it.
I actually have, there's something I will be sharing in greater detail with people. Last year, I went through an experience when an older man approached me, and knows that I'm married with 3 children. Older man, meaning as old as my grandpa, right?
Wow.
And you know, we as women will smile or show respect, or how are you, and you know, like how would you show respect to a grandpa? But obviously he had other intentions.
Oh, dear.
Turns out that he is mega multimillionaire, thought that he could buy me with his money. What ended up happening was that he didn't obviously get his way, and I had to call the cops because he was harassing all of my family, my friends. I don't know how he found them. I guess when you have money, you can do a lot of things. And it
Not
got to a
necessarily
point.
money, Zainab, not necessarily money. When you're toxic and you've got a goal and you want to hurt somebody, whether you have money or not, you're going to hurt other people like that.
I was actually bedridden for like 2 weeks because I was just
dear.
so much like, I guess I think that was the moment where I was like, how, like, you know, when it hits you that how does somebody do this to someone? Like how do you do that to someone? No means no. Like, you know, I don't know what other people have told you, but there's no way this like would work. So I don't know. Like, I feel like some people are deranged and they think that when they have a goal, they're going to do anything to get it. And it got to a point where like I had to call the cops, and that's when everything stopped. But I think that because of someone like him being in that position of power, money, I am sure, and that's what the police told me, that that person has probably done this to many women who have caved, or, you know, and nobody's like stood up to him in this way. And that's what I guess, like, segueing into my next question. But before I do that, about how one should react, you know, like not everyone's gonna be extreme like me. It's going like, don't mess with me, you know, I'm gonna call the cops. Like, it's not gonna end up being that way, and it's not gonna be that easy. It wasn't easy for me. But how, like, have you, when you hear of these stories, like for example, somebody comes up to you and says, you know, I've experienced domestic violence, and many people are opening up to me as well now.
Bless you. Yeah.
How do you, like, it's very hard. I'm sure it's hard for you because you're taking that in, right? Like, I know every time I get that message, I cry to myself. Nobody's gonna see that, but I'll cry for that woman who's experiencing that pain. When a woman says, I'm pregnant and I had to hide in my closet out of fear that my husband's gonna, you know, hit me and my baby, like, you know, these kind of stories, they really hit you. So how do you react to that? How do you give advice to a woman in that situation, or anyone in that situation who's going through such terrible abuse?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for sharing that. It's not easy to speak publicly about something like that, but I think it's part of helping women and men deal with these situations is by openly talking about what happens to us as well. And sharing that's the way you reacted was really good in terms of setting hard boundaries after he didn't understand. to get the police involved, and we need to do that. Now, after doing psychotherapy now, I've been 13 years at Carleton, but I've been doing it around 14 years as with other experience. It doesn't get easier. It doesn't get easier listening to these stories. You would think that you become more desensitized, which is a sign of, burning out perhaps, because then you've blocked your heart. I don't think I have gotten to that point. Inshallah, I never will, because each story is valid. Each story is painful. And sometimes I do end up crying, like you said. I've had cases of clients, whether it's my work at the university or outside, when people reach out, and it's like at least 2-3 a day people are reaching out asking for counseling with me, and I have to refer because I don't do private counseling. But the stories that I hear, Zainab, they rip my heart. They rip my heart sometimes. And sometimes I have to put a boundary around myself in terms of what I can do to help. Then that's where I refer them to other people. So these stories absolutely are heart-wrenching. But we also have to kind of toughen up ourselves so we know how to help them. Because if we emotionally engage ourselves as caregivers, as therapists, or people who are kind of gateways to support, when you emotionally engage yourself, then it becomes really hard to think clearly to help that person. I've actually made that mistake as a rookie a few times, in terms of where I've emotionally engaged myself with a client with her very difficult situation. It came back and hurt me in the end, in the sense that she did not enable herself. She wasn't able to get herself out of the situation. And I'm like, get out, but doing what I can, she wasn't able to. And I remember my supervisor at the time, she was helping me learn from this so I can help other people, but also put boundaries. So when these situations happen to you, depending on what it is, your question again was how to deal with that, how do we respond?
How do you deal with that? Before we get into how do
I deal when I hear these situations?
How do you deal with that? Yeah, today I'm picking your brain.
How do I personally deal with this? That temper I talked about earlier, that's what blows off in my head. That's what goes off initially in my head.
I've seen that temper. I've seen that temper.
You've seen it firsthand. In my head, that's what it feels like. When I hear somebody's pain, I feel it in my heart. But when there's violence, when there's death, when there's abuse, when there's any of these things that we're describing, my head just blows off inside here. And I, of course, have to be the professional, take a step back, breathe, calm down, and say, okay, strategically, how are we going to deal with this now, right? Yeah. And alhamdulillah, over the years, I've collected a variety of supports and resources, whether it's centers here in my city, here in the city, in the community, or actual other therapists where they do private practice, so then I'll send somebody to them, right? So a lot of people also reach out and say, hey, I've got counseling services, I'm doing free services. There's a sister in Toronto who's starting out her practice, and she's offering free counseling for a while, which is amazing. She's building up.
Shout out Ms. Zainab Mehdi.
That's right. Thank you. Nia Counseling, right? No, I didn't get the name right. Yeah. So absolutely, we support each other. And when people come to us with these problems, I can't be there to help them. It hurts me that I can't, but I also know if I don't take care of myself to help people, then I'm of no use. And that's actually happened a few times where I have burnt out. I've had to take time off to take care of myself because of toxic people around me. I did not realize. And I remember at the time when these toxic situations happened, there are other situations that happened a while back, I didn't recognize the toxicity of it until way later. And I'm being vague because I don't want to point out specific people, but I only was able to recognize that until way later on, when I took the time to take care of myself, to do psychotherapy myself. I went back to doing that. I have a therapist, by the way, which I've been seeing for years, and has been greatly helpful. And I saw
That's amazing. I'm so glad that you say that, because there's such a stigma around getting therapy, but as individuals and human beings, and even in Islam, it's so important to be able to have an outlet to talk about things and
confidence with somebody. Yeah,
exactly. You have to, and I think it should be very normalized, especially in women, men, marriages, before marriage, after marriage. Why not?
Absolutely. In every phase of our life, that struggles that we go through, counseling, a safe counseling, a therapeutic session or space can allow you to process and work through these challenges that you are stuck in your life, or things that are not allowing you to move forward, reaching your full potential, life goals, work, career, family. And yes, if there are problems like this, like death, family, divorce, personal situations with your life, all of these things, having that therapy can help. Now, I've had this therapist for years now to help me when I was in an abusive situation. And it truly brought light to me in terms of, because I was being projected and gaslighted on. And even though I was a therapist, I couldn't see it. And what was interesting is that professional people around me told me, hey, and one was a lawyer. She said, guess what? I have a psychologist, another lawyer, a counselor, and a social worker that I'm helping dealing with narcissistic partners and abusive partners. And I'm like, wow. So she at that point told me it has nothing to do with intelligence. Because these types of personalities are natural givers, Zainab. When you're a natural giver, you also tend to be, right, the victim or the preference of these types of personality types.
And they'll prey on people like that. They'll prey on people.
Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. They will prey on beautiful, giving souls like that. And that's
I think that goes back to the thing that I asked Lisa as well. It's like there's this, there's a huge myth, right, that only women who are not educated or not, people who are in positions where, like, it can be anyone who can go through abuse. It can be, and it can be men. There's a couple of men, I think, who've written here as well that they've been manipulated by women to give money, and many men and many men have brought this up, and I think you can talk about this now. I want to give men that podium now, because I feel like I've been talking about the other side, right? But men have come up and said women will take advantage of their financial ability to provide, so they'll pressure them. So they'll say,
in Islamic households.
Exactly. So talk about that a bit.
So when this poster came out, I got some feedback like, why are you just focusing on men and so on. I'm like, just watch, okay? Just watch the program before you judge, and learn from what we're going to talk about. And Zainab also wants to talk about the female toxicity that also exists. And I can tell you, guaranteed, with the sheikhs that I work with the other counselors that I work with, the community leaders that I work with, guaranteed there is abuse against men as well, but it's not seen the same way. Sure, it could be physical, right? And there's a lot of stigma around that.
And I think they can't talk about it the same way as we can about women as well. Like, I feel like they think they'll be seen as weak. Like, how can a man be? But
how can a man
as women, we know our superpowers, and we know that, we have a lot of power to manipulate and get what we want. So
if you want to use those skills, absolutely. And you mentioned it, the money, the financial aspect. And this is something that we see often, is that women who are in the position of abusers and manipulators and toxic partners will abuse and manipulate their partners when it comes to money. See there, that woman over there, you see the Prada shoes and the pants, or the Prada shoes and the shoes and purse, sorry, I mix it up. Purse and shoes that she's got. You see their new house. You see how they're taking him on their trips. The man's working day and night to try and to bring money,
which is something that a true woman would appreciate. It's not about what he's providing; it's his effort in providing, and that's something to be celebrated. A man who tries hard to work for his family, no matter.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you a generic but specific at the same time example that I've heard in communities where this woman, hypothetically, comes from a family that's well off, they're okay, but the husband is an immigrant that comes in from another country that she sponsors him here. This is classic, right? So this man no longer has his degrees that are relevant or equivalent here. He has to start over. He could be working at a pizzeria, a restaurant, taxi, Uber, whatever. Not the same status that he was before. Yet little Miss Princess here expects her husband to pay like daddy's credit card. Do you know how often I hear this?
That's terrible.
It is. And there's no respect for the men that way. There's also manipulation and abuse and putting the man down, comparing him to other men in the community. And this in front of the children. Imagine what the daughters and the sons are looking at when the mother mistreats the man like that. So this,
and I wanna bring up the ego part that you said about before. I mean, let's talk about that, because men do have egos, right? And when we talk about narcissism and all these toxic behaviors, that's the bad side that's the bad side of the ego we're talking about. There's a good side to a man's ego that makes him want to provide, makes him want to be, you know, the protector of the family,
Protector. Right.
jealous, you know,
In
and
Arabic, we
those
call
are
it
good.
ghira.
There's a good case.
Right.
Exactly.
The ghira in Arabic. And like you said, these are positive qualities that are, let's say, connected to strength, right? And these are qualities that are admired and probably even sought after in a partner, right? But then the flip side of that, that jealousy, and there's no exact word for ghira in English, can be translated to jealousy, but it's also protection, like you mentioned, right? The being the man of the household, so to speak, the responsibility that's given by God on him to provide and protect.
Any of those things can be taken to the extreme. That's when you get the
Absolutely.
toxic behavior, right? When a man
Absolutely.
gets to a point where he doesn't trust whatever his wife is doing, when he's counting every penny, when he is, like we talked about, that narcissism, when he thinks he's above her and she's there too. Like, I heard of some stories where women have messaged me and said that my husband will never help me around the house. He says that's my job.
That's a woman's role.
I have 3-4 children, but he says that's my job. But when he's with his mom, he doesn't mind helping. He doesn't mind, you know, because she's the queen, but the woman. So what are you doing? What, you tried to marry someone to enslave them? Like, I don't understand some of these philosophies here.
These
But
are
like, going to
mentalities.
the next question is that, like, how is a normal person, right? You said, because it's hard for even intelligent people and professionals to recognize the behavior. How are, like, everyday Joes like me supposed to recognize this in other people? And how are we supposed to react to it? I think that's what I'm trying to say.
So reacting is through being aware of some of the things that we're saying, right? I think we've all experienced feeling bad after being around negative people. Define bad, all the things we've described here, right? Such as, like we said, the physical responses in our body, but also emotionally how we're feeling. Self-doubt, self-confidence is diminished, and you just feel also that you almost have to please that person. You do anything to please them, right? Both male and female here. So being aware of this is really important. So we're saying, how can we learn more? Well, first of all, listen to these types of programs more. Educate yourself. Go listen to some other programs that Zainab has done individually, also that I have done on the topic of narcissism, on the topic of harassment, slander, toxicity, abuse, global campaign against violence, domestic violence that Lisa and I were a part of as well. So things like that. It's really important to educate yourself, read articles about this, talk to professionals in the field. So if you are not sure, you can reach out and ask questions and look at what you need to do. Now, reacting with emotional intelligence.
I'm asking this because a lot of us really don't know how to react. Like, you know, we'll either there's a few things I can see happening, right? Either we'll keep forgiving, we'll just say, you know, like, let it go, but we've not let it go, and it's hurting our, like, we stop trusting people. And I know I've done that. Like, people have hurt me and I'm like, I can't trust anyone anymore. It took a while for me to come out of that as well. Or we'll overreact. So we'll start getting frustrated. We'll start snapping. We'll, you know, put that, you know, that's what I say. Like, if we don't cope with things and if we are hurt by others, we might end up hurting others, if that makes sense. Hurt people hurt others. So that's why I'm asking this question. It's important to react in the right way, right?
Absolutely. Let's take my breath here because I'm allergic to my cat, I think, these days, and I'm getting these.
No way.
I think I'm allergic to him. I figured it out. I can't be sick this whole time from the beginning of the pandemic till now. I haven't had COVID or anything like that. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why am I always? And it turns out I think I'm allergic to the cat. But anyhow, so
you've had it for such a long time.
Well, I was reading about that, just like you're saying, how should we know? Read up about things. And I learned that you can get allergic reactions to cats later on. You can develop it. So I'm looking to deal with that. So in terms of how do we respond? First, recognize how you are feeling. Reflect upon how you are feeling. How does this person make you feel when they demand things of you, when they push things back onto them, away from you? All these things that we described. How do you feel? Okay? If you truly feel like you don't give a hoot, then you're fine. right? You just let it, because some people don't care. Some people just let it roll off their shoulders. Even if they behave like that, they don't let it impact them. For those that are feeling opposite of that, then things need to be done. For example, setting boundaries, okay? Trying to talk to that person, setting boundaries. So and using I statements. I feel upset, hurt, fill in the blanks, okay? When I don't get a chance to ABC, when I don't get to complete my sentence, when I don't get to complete my thought. So instead of saying, when you do this, you make me feel this way, that's not going to fly. That's not going to fly in any argument, really, even with a person who doesn't have these characters. It's very confrontational. So you got to be strategic. So saying things such as, I feel very hurt or disrespected when I don't get the opportunity to continue the conversation or finish my thought, or when I'm interrupted. You're not doing this. You're doing this. So when you speak with compassion, it's not weakness, right? Speaking with managing your emotions and regulating your emotions is not a sign of weakness, quite the opposite. It's a sign of strength that you're able to manage your emotions in a healthy way while speaking with this person. Take a time out, go to the side, do some breathing exercises, let your anger up by punching a pillow, go for a run, dance on the spot, something to get all that energy out, those endorphins, the negative hormones.
I like what you said about, compassion. And I think oftentimes we forget to be kind to ourselves. I talk about being kind. And there's that beautiful quote by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he says, treat your brother like you would treat yourself. So wouldn't we first, the foundation of that is that we should want for ourselves what we should want for others. And that means that we need to, deal with our emotions. If we're hurt, if we're going through something, we need to look after ourselves. No one's going to come in and look after us but ourselves.
Absolutely.
If that makes sense.
However, if you have been abused though, Zainab, it becomes really hard in that moment when you're low to do that. And sometimes it takes other people to help you lift that. What were you saying? Sorry.
I think I wanted to stop you where you said about boundaries, because I have a really interesting question.
Uh-oh.
Are you ready for it?
Inshallah.
There's this whole so on social media and, with the way things are going, it's very easy in today's world to cut off people, right? Like block, remove.
Cancel culture.
Cancel culture. You leave like the groups, you leave this and that. You just don't want to deal with people, so you'll, deal with it by removing them.
But removing yourself from them.
From them, yeah. And social media will constantly put these posts out that, set up boundaries, cut. And I feel like we're becoming more and more isolated as we're doing that. Right. And whereas when you look at Islam, right, it talks a lot about the importance of araham, the importance of maintaining relationships, the importance of saying salam, even to people who you might not necessarily like. You've seen the Prophet deal with people who toxic people who threw trash on him.
Absolutely.
He visited them, right? So where is that? If you understand what I'm trying to say, where is that balance?
Balance,
yeah. Because as a Muslim, and many people who are here who are Muslim or even not Muslim, but who are trying to be a good human being, but not letting other people affect them and their behaviors or cause self-doubt or self-worry, and really trying to take care of themselves. How do you do that, I guess?
So it's tricky. It's a tricky fine balance, because on one hand we are taught by the examples of the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam how to engage with people, how to connect with people, etc., even if they do harm onto you. And on the other hand, you have modern Western philosophy, psychology, this contemporary world of social media where we have cancel culture. So how do you figure out between the two? And I think there is a balance between the two, right? So first, encompassing these akhlaq, you try with the people around you, right? Perhaps call them out on their behavior, talk about the behavior, or say, that made me feel uncomfortable, and but do it with kindness, perhaps do it with, and I'm reminding myself, because I can be really snappy sometimes at men males, not men, because there's a difference between men and males. I always try to make that distinction, who make comments such as, mashallah, sister, or you're beautiful, or this. And I'm like, I don't have tolerance for that. And I don't have kindness or compassion to go to that. I will jump to say, are you my mahram? Are you a part of my family? What right do you have to speak to me this way? Like, I don't really come out as being nice, and I don't sound nice when I talk that way, is because they've crossed the boundary, right? And a lot of people gave me a hard time recently when there was an issue when this male commented on my appearance, and I told him, what right do you have to comment on my appearance? Kindly, actually, I was respectful.
A lot of women are like, that's what I find so sad, is that, you know, in the public eye, men will get criticized for their work, like, you know, good constructive criticism, right? But women out there who are really just trying to do their work, it's just all about just how they look, their skin color, what they're wearing. Like, it's very, like, we've reduced and objectified women to the point where everything about women, you're trying to project shallowness onto them. And I know you've experienced it. I've experienced it. You know, a lot of women I know experience it, and many women, you know, recoil from their work or doing things in the public eye because of these reasons. And they're valid reasons. Not everyone has the ability to stand up to this. Yeah. And it can really affect you. Like, when you're talking about toxic masculinity, this is
one of them. I'm going to go back to the Islamic question after I answer this, because it kind of links, right? And this is well, that's how we roll. We like to just go into one thing into another. The conversation is a beautiful flow of conversation. So for this topic, in terms of male toxicity, when it comes to these entitled type of comments that males feel that they can say, and there's nothing wrong with them. Perhaps they come from Arab cultures, and I know in Arab cultures or Italian cultures or some, and you know, don't get mad at me if I mention this, because my own Italian friends, my own Arab friends will tell me this is part of the culture, right? So I'm not generalizing or pointing fingers or stereotyping when people from their own culture are saying this to me. They're very loose with their tongue when it comes to talking about women, and that's the normal part of the culture in terms of talking to women based on their looks. So, salam, kifik ya hilwa, you know, how are you, beautiful? Or, you know, and we've started to use that in our own language. Hey, beautiful. You know, it's like, well, not really. That's not very respectful to the person, especially when you talk about women in modest hijab, right? And we've seen the response of a lot of women. You and I have both seen this, Zainab, where women have pulled back from public work or doing the work that they're doing because of such comments. Now, what's interesting, recently this happened with a male who commented on a picture, and I said, kindly, you know, what gives you the right to comment like that? Kindly do not make comments on my appearance. Now, he flipped it back, the toxicity. He flipped it back and commented on how I have trust issues, and I'm not a religious person. I'm a hypocrite person because I go to ziyarah and do all this, and I help people, and I brainwash women into these ideas. I'm like, whoa, dude, all I asked you to do was do not comment on my appearance, and please respect the same for other women. But like you mentioned earlier with the millionaire playboy, there is that some women will allow this to happen.
Oh, it just took me a minute.
They will then try this on other women. Except other women like you and I will set the boundaries and say, it's not okay for your disgusting male entitlement to comment on the way I look, whether it's a professional event that I'm promoting or it's me with a kitten on my head. You have no right to comment on my appearance. Okay? You want to get to know me as a friend, as a partner, or whatever it is. To all the men and women out there, there's respectful ways of doing that rather than hitting on someone and commenting on their looks.
I honestly feel sad because like you said, I don't think it's their fault, in the sense that, like, they're people, I feel like are raised in, like, in the environment we're in, Berak, let's be honest, like in this Western environment where they talk so much about freedom, you know, all we see is women shaking their butts and boobs, and it's all about sex, and, you know, everything is free and accessible nowadays, and women are objectified on magazine covers. We want to say we're free and all that, but like it's part of this culture now that a woman is beautiful. She's a sex object. Nothing's changed from like ages ago. It's the same thing, except it's in the guise. It's in the guise of freedom. So nobody talks against it. But then you and I are seeing that that's manifesting itself into women who are actually just trying to do their work. You know, we're professional journalists, activists, scholars, female scholars, whatever you said, mental health professionals, and it's just all about the looks. That's all everything's about,
May I
you
make a
know.
comment? Look at this. Somebody here made the comment. If you ignore their comments instead of confronting them, it will work. No, it will not. Because a lot of people gave me sass for speaking out about this. They put the blame back on me for continuing a conversation with this person. I did eventually stop the conversation when I realized I'm dealing with a toxic person here. I'm dealing with all of what we've described already. Back on me, refusing to listen to the point of view, disrespect, manipulating the topic. When I recognized that, I immediately stopped the conversation and said, be a man, stop talking to me. And I blocked it off right there. So no, we're not going to ignore. We're also in the day and age where we will speak up against something that makes us feel uncomfortable.
I'll have to say, I'm sorry, but I'm guilty of that cancel culture myself. I actually hired someone. I hired someone. Honestly, it got to a point where my husband and I sat down. We're like, okay, we're gonna do something about this, and I hired someone to just block people, and this is like thousands of blocks. Like this is not a 110 people number. This is thousands of blocks that, because I feel like maybe I'm not as strong in the sense that to just sit and talk and explain. And I'm like, look, if you're not gonna respect my platform, you don't deserve to be here. And maybe it's a bit harsh. No, it's harsh. I wish I didn't have to do that.
What got you to this point? To answer your question, what got you to this point?
It's frustration.
But you also attempted before. I've seen how you explain and work and put so much effort into explaining and educating. Now, when we've done the education, we've done the explaining, we've even perhaps lowered ourselves to their mentality and their behavior. We've done that because we're being compassionate, like we've been taught in our faith, and being understanding. If they're still refusing when it comes to boundaries, absolutely cut them out. Now, this is very difficult with family. Now, when I say put boundaries, when we talk about how do you deal with this, when I talk about boundaries, I'm not saying just cancel people or leave WhatsApp groups or tell people don't talk to me. I'm also talking about, and this is psychotherapeutic, in terms of limiting your emotional engagement with this person. Meaning, when they speak with you in a toxic way, when they behave towards you in a toxic manner, do not allow yourself to engage emotionally with the conversation. Let it go. As
much as I try to not do that. It's sad to say, like I try to think that I have a thick skin. I try to act tough, and I think people who are close to me, you know that. My husband knows that. Zainab ain't all that in a box of chocolates. And I do emotionally engage with everything that comes my way. And maybe that's how I am, and I don't know how to change that. I don't know.
This is something, Zainab, this is where therapy comes in. This is when you have a good therapist and the process can help you work with that. This is not an overnight.
Hook your sister up.
I'll help you, inshallah. However, here's the thing. This is something where therapy comes in to help. When you're dealing with a toxic environment of people you cannot get yourself out of, which is quite common when you're dealing, let's say, with parents or siblings or a partner. Now with partner, we'll get to that in a second, right? But when you're dealing with that type of environment, there are ways of where you have to wait and be patient. There are ways of dealing with that. This is where the therapeutic process, and I can't obviously get into all of it now, can help you with that. Learn how to cope without getting emotionally engaged. And we'll discuss that another time perhaps, because that's a whole topic on itself. People get trainings and workshops on that. But this is how you do it. Inshallah. So let's go back to answering the two things that we jumped off of. So the public, for the women who do public work and who feel, because I got so many comments, and I'm sure you've seen that, where women said, I cannot share and I choose not to. But what was interesting was projected back on me. Deal with it by ignoring, by saying thank you when they comment on your appearance. No, thank you. I will not say thank you, because that is validating and enabling the behavior. And third, pulling themselves out, like not putting photos and stuff. But why? We have every right to put photos out there respectfully, using Islamic principles, of course, because there's a whole other world of fashion, hijab, and immodesty, which we'll talk about another time. But if you were respectfully portraying yourself, you have a message or something that makes people happy. I thought the kitten was cute and I thought it would make people happy because my daughter from a birthday party put the kitten on my
It
head and I thought it
does.
was adorable.
And I
It
love
was
seeing
really,
people
it
with
was
animals.
happy, right? Which is great. And it honestly, I didn't put much thought into it when I did it at the time. And sometimes we fall into that trap, not thinking deeply or well into something what we put out. So dealing with that, if you explain, your position to the person and they still don't respect your position, then yeah, you have every right to block. And I publicly shamed males who have done this. And I've gotten a lot of slack for it, but a lot of support as well from both males and females. And it's time we speak out. If you are not comfortable with somebody saying something towards you that makes you feel ill, I immediately felt sick when that comment said, "You're beautiful." Excuse me, you're Arab. You're from my same culture and you're Muslim and you're saying that to a muhajjaba? What gives you the right? So my initial response in my head was, fireworks, and I calmed down and responded in a calm way. But if they don't respect that, you have every right to disengage by blocking, by pulling yourself out. Now with family, different, we said. That's a whole other story. Let's go back to the Islamic question that we were talking about.
Let's go to the family. Let's go to the family because you know why? Because people are in the pandemic, are stuck in the house, right? They have nowhere to go. Everyone's in everybody's faces all day long. Especially people who are in lockdown, right? Like it's hard for a lot of people. And how do people set up healthy boundaries while still respecting their
Islamic
siblings,
values,
whatever?
So you mentioned sulat araham earlier, which is very interesting because I've had discussions with scholars on this when people have come to me, when I've seen and experienced these issues, like whether it's with a parent, a sibling, a partner, and all of that. So, or it could be outside, relatives outside that are toxic. So it's very important, just like we've been taught, to keep the salat al-raham, to keep the connection with our relatives. However, this is where psychology comes in. And this is also what I've heard and learned from the scholars, is with limits and boundaries as well. Okay? So when we're dealing with relatives that are very toxic, where you don't have to talk to them all the time, you do the bare minimum. Meaning, it's Eid, call them on Eid. Beginning of Shahr Ramadan, bless them, call them and bless them for the month. Or birthdays, wish them happy birthday, So engaging with them with absolute minimum engagement, so to speak, by sending messages, by calling, but leaving it at that. You don't have to go out with them. You don't have to be with them every weekend. It doesn't have to be ABC. So you limit your interaction, but also you have to train your spirit. You have to train yourself and your soul not to react and jump when these things happen. Now, in the home, that's very difficult. I hear a lot of young people who are living with abusive siblings and parents, right? When I work with university students, we always look at ways, especially if they're Muslim, and there are obviously families, I work with non-Muslim clientele as well, and we look at how we can support them, whether it's financial. If they can't stay in that home, we look at how to helping them financially so they can get out of that situation because they're in a toxic and abusive environment that is impacting them emotionally, mentally, physically, but as well as their financial challenges. Now, I'll give you a case. A few years ago, there was a case where there was a sister from the community who was being abused at home. She just happened to go to my university where the professors noted she was not there. So they brought this urgently to the attention. And because I was Muslim and Arab and hijabi, they got me involved on the case. And it just so happened I found out when they gave me the name, I asked in the community through very discreet ways that this was somebody from my own community that was being abused. And so what we ended up doing is I consulted with the sheikh at the time that was in the community, who himself straight up said, call the police. There's a family member that is abusing her, that he had been involved with the family, who had tried many times to try and prevent this abuse. And that person was not listening. The sheikh was yelling on the phone, by the way. I had to step out of the room with all these university personnel. And he was yelling on the phone, get the police involved. There's no other way to deal with this animal because he's not listening to us. And he is crossing the lines, whether it's Islamically, morally, or legally as well. And that's exactly what the university did. So they ended up doing that. They called for a wellness check. They got the police involved. And that person, backed off from harming this person. So there you go. This is an Islamic case in a Western community very modern community type of thing, where these services were involved to help stop the abuse that was taking place.
And I'm so glad you brought this up because, you know, there's been women who have messaged me and said, look, like I was going through abuse, and when I reached out to my sheikh or to the scholars in our community, they would say, be patient,
Be patient.
or you know, you cannot do anything against your husband. He might be disciplining you. And, you know, it's like, it makes me happy to see that, you know, a sheikh did this and took that step, because sometimes, you know, things, we need to intervene and things have to stop. And a lot of times I think people will take advantage of the fact that this person won't out us, like, or there's a certain understanding that, like, we have to keep everything within, no one can know what's happening outside or make us look bad. And but we have to understand that this is not, like, even an atom of injustice is not allowed. We cannot put up with that.
There you go. There's compassion, connecting with people, giving them chances, trying to be understanding, especially when there's mental health issues involved with people, right? But then there's what you just said right now, which is a huge part of our faith, standing up against tyranny. And this also includes tyranny in the home. When a man hits his wife, or when a woman hits and abuses her husband or the children, that's tyranny. That's a form of dhulm. However, we still try to create restoration in the home by engaging, getting the right people involved to help, give parenting skills, perhaps anger management skills, get counseling for the couple, get support for the children. We still try to do that. We've seen cases where children have been taken away from abusive families, including in our Muslim communities. We're very afraid of what we have called the CAS, right? The Children's Aid Society. So very much so, because of these types of things, there's cultural discipline as well sometimes, where they hit the children as a form of tarbiyah, as a form of parenting, but that's not discipline, rather, but that's not accepted in our faith as well. So there has to be a lot of psychoeducation done to, I know I've seen this with refugee families, immigrant families, right, where they've learned, no, this is not how it's done here. But then some continue, and we know this is where toxicity
I think
is.
Like people from abroad, especially immigrants, have a hard time. I remember working with refugee families. It's a norm in other cultures to actually hit to parents.
Discipline. Ironically, Zainab, you and I both know this. This is not what our faith teaches. It's not in the faith, it's in the culture. It's in the culture. And this also is ironic when we talk about women and women's rights and women's empowerment and protection of women. There's no such thing as hitting a woman. That's not part of the religion. That's part of the culture. And we know this as Muslims, but outside of it, the misconceptions, when they see us, we're seen as oppressed and abused by our men and so on and so forth. No, it's the culture. It's the ignorant mentality that the Prophet came to alleviate from 1400 years ago, that still continues, not just within our own communities, but outside as well. And that's really important. So I hope this got clarified. When we talk about sulat araham, there is a balance. We are required to keep that connection with our families. There's ways and strategies of coping while still respecting the religion, but there's also a black and white when you're dealing with tyranny. When you are dealing with somebody who is beating their wife and children, or a woman who's beating her children and harming her husband, no, that's a form of tyranny. That's a black and white thing right there, especially if it's consistent, especially if they're not getting the help and refusing help, like we're talking about here, toxic, manipulative people. If they're not acknowledging and they're not refusing, this is where cancel culture comes in. This is where block comes in. This is where authorities come in to change things. There is no patience with that.
You said something very important, and I think we're going to wrap up this discussion with that, is that the only reason that I'm talking about this is because I think there is a huge lack of awareness.
Yes.
First of all, that this is so prevalent because it's so silent. And I didn't know. I mean, I'd hear cases here and there. We'd find out that this man was hitting his women for so long and they just got divorced. And it was like things like that you hear from your family, all right? But until you're not doing the charity work, or like you're in the system where you're getting calls from people, then you have your platforms online, when you start to see the reality that so many people are going through this. And I think the stat is that 1 in 3 women will go through severe abuse. 1 in 3 women, and that's the reported cases, right?
And especially now,
He
Zainab,
said
in the pandemic, how it's increased because people have
it's
been forced to be in each
exactly.
other's spaces.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think that's why I'm talking about this now, because it's the pandemic. Everyone is stuck inside. We don't know what's happening inside. We've gotten calls from women and children who are asking for food, or, cases where like all these organizations have also shut down and they're not performing. Children's organizations that used to provide food to the children are not working, and they need people like our organizations to intervene. So it's gotten to a really terrible position, and I really want to help create that awareness and at least start this
Bless you.
conversation that this is happening and it's not all right. And I think we can end with this one question, because I'm sorry this went on so long and we didn't get
So
to
much for
ask all
20
of these
minutes.
questions.
So much for
I
20 minutes
know
between
we
us.
said
Impossible.
I have a timer and everything, but I
Impossible.
think these conversations are so, like, they just free flowing, and I like that. So
Alhamdulillah.
um, there is a question by Adam, and I think it works well with my final question as well about the healing process.
Yeah.
So he says that, do you think this behavior, toxic behavior, will ever come to an end? And I guess what's the way forward, like from parenting, from relationship wise, and from society? What's the way forward in terms of healing and stopping this behavior?
I think we've mentioned that many times already throughout, and I'll reiterate it now. It is about setting up boundaries around others towards you, but also you towards the toxicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means not emotionally getting engaged. How you do that is working through the therapeutic process, learning about it, read about it. There's some great books out there that can help you with that. And I'll give you a title. There's this book called Stop Walking on Eggshells. And this book
Mm-hmm.
is specifically written. I lent it out to a student. They never gave it back to me, but you can find it online. That's okay. Inshallah, they benefit from it. And it's about how to deal with people that you live with who have borderline personality disorder, who exhibit a lot of what we've described so far, right? And a lot of people can get help for that and support with that. But this book, I recall, has a great chapter on how to live with somebody who is toxic and abusive. And it describes in detail how not to get engaged emotionally with these types of personalities, okay? So it's really important to learn to do that. If you are not living with these people and you've done what we've described in terms of trying to keep sulat araham, trying to do education, trying to bring awareness, and they're just not, like the example I gave of that guy who just kept on going on and just projecting and gaslighting back on. It's like, okay, you know what? Done. I recognize you are toxic to me. I am becoming angrier with your behavior. I do not feel good about how you're projecting your illness, your sickness, your negative thoughts onto me. It stops right here. I choose to end this conversation. This is where you cut. You are allowed to cut people off. You are not, they're nothing to you. They're just on social media, which is almost like a fake world out there, right? So you are not obligated. You are not obligated. It's what you take off of social media that makes it real for you, right? So you are not obligated to stay in contact with this person. And I say this a lot with the young students, and I work with the young population. You don't need to see your ex-partner's, new partners, or you don't need to see what they're doing. You don't need these toxic people on Twitter to keep hounding you. You don't need that. You don't need to connect with that. You are allowed to cut off from that. Connect with people who are healing. Connect with like-minded souls, like people like Zainab and I, who are very caring, supportive, and loving of what we do. These are the type of people that lift you and support you and inspire you. That's what you want to be around, right? You choose that sometimes in this
I don't know
world.
if you saw that message Sarah posted on, and I shared it, but it was very nice. I feel like that was exactly what we're talking about, is that, even like social media is a huge part of people's lives now. Like that's how we get our news, information. People, are getting updates on each other's lives. And I think it can be used for the good. It has a lot of bad, a lot of bad, but it has a lot of good. But what her main message is that we need to be very careful. We need to be careful, like just like we need to be careful what we eat and what we do in life. We need to be careful who we're following, what kind of accounts we're following, what kind of people we're letting to, just like we would have friends in real life. And we very carefully vet people who are in our real life. We need to be careful who we allow online. Just like you
In our
said,
energy,
surrounding ourselves
in our
with that.
energy, in our space.
Exactly. Because
Absolutely.
it's going to affect you. Whether you like it or not, it's going to affect you. So don't let people come into your life that have no benefit for you.
You
We
said it
wouldn't
right
do that.
there.
We
The
wouldn't do that.
benefit.
Why would you do that to yourself? And
Because
I think
sometimes
it
people are
goes
not
back.
aware. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not aware. Somebody
Thank you
mentioned
so much.
quickly, Zainab, I know you have to go, but just quickly, somebody mentioned, should we have more of these types of programs or go straight to the professionals? I would
Mhm.
say educate yourself a little bit more. Look at the resources that are available online. We want to use online and social media for good. There are absolutely tons of resources out there for good. And if you still
Mhm.
find yourself stuck in that situation, then you can go to a professional to get some advice. Absolutely.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Berak, for
Thank
joining
you, my
me,
dear sister. Bless you.
honoring
Thank you.
me, gracing my platform. I know we've been wanting to do something for a long time. I'm
Alhamdulillah.
usually very bad at, doing lives and interviews. So I'm so glad we got a chance to, connect. And I hope
Alhamdulillah wa
that
shukran.
after
You
the
did great,
pandemic,
Zainab.
we get
Thank
to meet.
you.
Inshallah. Take
Inshallah.
care.
Thank you, Zainab, so much for exploring these important topics and looking at them from different angles, from different perspectives with people, whether it's personal stories or professional. It's so important. Thank you so much. And I'm honored to do this with you. And I look forward to doing more in terms of talking about things that we're both passionate about, inshallah. Bless you, my dear sister.
Yeah. All
Take
right.
care. Assalamu alaikum.